This episode is brought to you by VMGVinyl.com. Professional record cleaning, restoration, rejuvenation, and grading. Refresh your records with VMGVinyl.com.
This episode is brought to you by Groove Washer, the best record cleaners and protective sleeves for your vinyl collection. Ask for the Groove Washer from your local shop or go to GrooveWasher.com. Discount code VinylGuide10. And now, on with the show. Welcome to The Vinyl Guide, the podcast for record collectors and music nerds. Here's your host, the biggest record nerd of them all, Nate Goyer.
Oh, well, hey everyone, it's Nate. Welcome to episode 439 of The Vinyl Guide, the podcast for record collectors and music nerds. And guess what, dear peoples? I am full of coffee, I'm shot out of a cannon, and I'm ready to share the first part of our two-part interview with the great Jack Douglas, a guy whose name is on a lot of records in your record collection. I can guarantee it. Cheap Trick's debut, Live at Budokan, Alice Cooper, Muscle of Love, the New York Dolls debut, Montrose, Jump on It, Aerosmith's Golden Period, Rocks, Get Your Wings, Toys in the Attic, Live Bootleg, Jack's fingerprints are all over those albums, as well as producing John Lennon and Yoko Ono's Double Fantasy. Jack was a trusted advisor in John's final days. He shares some of those stories as well. And Jack recently produced a new album for the band Silverplanes. The album is called Airbus. We discussed that at length too. Airbus was not only produced by Jack, but it was mixed by Beatles alumni Geoff Emerick and was one of Jeff's final projects before passing. So it's a significant work. And Airbus is a gorgeous album. I encourage everyone to check it out. Just Google the band Silverplanes. There's a few songs on streaming right now. I'll put links to videos and a vinyl pre-order in the episode notes. But yeah, check it out. Silverplanes, the album is Airbus. Follow them on streaming and grab a vinyl copy when you can. So again, what you're about to hear today is part one of the Jack Douglas interview. And you want to make sure you follow the Vinyl Guide in your podcast app so you could be alerted when part two becomes available. In part two, we do a deep dive into the recording and production of Double Fantasy. We talk about John's final days. Lots of very interesting stories in part two as well. So hold out for that and just follow the Vinyl Guide podcast and you'll be sorted as soon as it becomes available. Unless you are a patron of the Vinyl Guide. Part two is already up at patreon.com/Vinyl Guide. So if you enjoy this podcast we make and you want to help us out, well, that is certainly appreciated. This is a perfect way to do it. Go to patreon.com/Vinyl Guide. We always put extras up there for show patrons, high-resolution audio files, extended episodes, commercial-free episodes. It's all up there for our patrons, including immediate access to part two of our conversation with Jack. Now, if you are fascinated by Beatles stories and interviews with musicians and memories of that time, well, there's several other episodes of the Vinyl Guide you may want to check out, including our interview with Klaus Voormann. Klaus is sharing stories of early Beatles, designing the Revolver album cover, and lots more. That's Klaus Voormann, episode 141 of the Vinyl Guide. We also have an episode on John Lennon's personal copy of the Butcher cover. That's episode 57 of the Vinyl Guide. We even tell the story of John Lennon's album Roots. It was a precursor to the John Lennon rock and roll album. It involves underworld figures and all sorts of subterfuge. That's episode 31 of the Vinyl Guide. And we even discussed the launch of Apple Records and the White Album with Beatles historian Bruce Spicer. That's episode 146 and lots more. So follow the Vinyl Guide in your podcast app and you can enjoy all of those episodes and more today. No paywall, no nothing except vinyl record and music nerd talk. So, with that, let's get into part one of our conversation with Mr. Jack Douglas. Ladies and gentlemen, this week on the Vinyl Guide, we are very honored to have Mr. Jack Douglas, whose name is probably on many, many of the records that you own, and some that you definitely should, including Silverplanes Airbus, which is coming out,
Yeah.
I think April 5th. Is that the date?
I think it is, yeah.
If
Yeah,
4 or
for the whole
5, I'm in Australia, so sometimes that could be March 5th or April. Yeah, but 4 or 5. And there's a single out and a video out now. Let's talk about Silverplanes a bit, because this is a really, really good album, Jack. How did you get involved with Silverplanes?
Actually, Aaron Smart was a friend of my son's in the Bay Area when my son was going to college in the Bay Area. He ran into Aaron through a mutual friend, Jesse Kramer, who is
Joey's son of Aerosmith.
Joey's son, and then they ended up, I think, renting a house while they were in college. Well, Aaron wasn't in college, and neither was Jesse, but my son was.
It sounds like trouble.
Yeah. Actually, my son got through it somehow. And then he, at some point, some years later, after my son got established in his business in Los Angeles, he said to me, "You should really meet up with this guy, Aaron Smart. You guys have a lot in common." Well, it turns out that I had worked at a studio on Sunset Boulevard that was in the Los Angeles Athletic Club. It was in the top of the athletic club, and it was in the back. It had been previously, in the glory days of Hollywood, it had been a screening room. And it turned into this really great little studio. Had a wonderful old Neve board in it and a nice live room and a ton of gear. And so I worked there, and this is years now before. And there was, there was always rumors about the guy who owned the studio, but I never met him. I never met the guy. It turns out that was Aaron Smart. He owned the studio. I hadn't met him. And then my son arranged to have a meeting because he said Aaron wanted to do some recording. He had a thing of his own going on, and that he would really like to hook up with me. And we met. At the time, I was living on Johnny Depp's estate. And Aaron came over, and we had a meeting, and we were kind of very like-minded. And he said, and you worked in my studio. I said, "That was your studio? That was a great studio." He goes, "Yeah. They turned it back into a screening room, and I had to move out." So I've built a studio in downtown LA. And if we do work, if we do make a record together, that's where we'll do it, in my studio in downtown LA. And I went down there, and there was that board, that great Neve board, and all the outboard was there, and his mic collection. And we started making this record there. It's
a gorgeous sounding record. And there's another name that popped out on the credits of this is Jeff Emmerich.
Yeah.
Jeff was actually booked on our show right before he passed. So it was, but that was in 2018.
Yeah.
So has this album been sitting idle for 5+ years?
Yeah, it has, because we weren't sure what we're going to do with it. We thought we'll put it out at some point, but and Jeff, by the way, was a really dear friend of mine. And so I asked Jeff if he would mix this. He was just a lovely, lovely man, and funny and fun to work with, and we were all quite shocked by his sudden passing. It was terrible, but he worked in a studio in the Valley, and I asked him if he would mix this, and he said, well, he has to listen to it to see if it's right for him. Mm-hmm. And I played him some of my rough mixes, and he said, absolutely, I'd love to mix this. This is right up my alley. And so, some of the guys who mix this, I would be at the desk with them, but it was, Jeff Emmerich, Shelly Akis, Jay Messina. Right. These are guys that know the business. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's such a beautiful sounding record. We did our best recording it to make it clean and very fidelic, and very true sounding. Well, of course, we had that Neve board, which is, a wonderful, and a collection of microphones. And I added my collection of gear to his. And of course, now we've opened a rather large studio in Gardena in Los Angeles. Great big live room and a much bigger control room. Really, it's quite beautiful.
Is this with Aaron? So you're continuing the partnership with Aaron?
Yeah, Aaron and I are partners. We partnered up with the studio a few years ago, and then we decided to go ahead and do a label, and then we would put out these records on our label. And in the meantime, I became very good friends with a fellow by the name of Douglas Durst. And Mr. Durst is one of the biggest holders of real estate in New York City. And turns out that he is also a rock and roller from way back. He graduated from Berkeley, and he was a hippie and a rock and roller, and then took over. It's a family business, and took over this giant real estate firm in Manhattan. And we were talking. He was in Los Angeles, and he sent me a text saying, "Are you in LA?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Come on over to the Bel Air, and we'll have dinner." And while we were having that meeting, we decided to do a label together. So it was about 6 months of contract work. And then we brought Make Records, which was Aaron's company, in with mine, which is Confidential Records, under Douglas's umbrella. So we have a real record company.
Okay.
And we have 4 artists signed between Make and myself. We have Robin Taylor Zander, who's the son of Robin Zander from Cheap Trick. We have Ellie Lowe, who's kind of a torchy Atlanta Southern girl pop singer. We have Aaron on Make Records, and we have the Detroit Youth Choir, who is now doing a mini series on the Disney Plus. You're aware probably of Robin Taylor Zander.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, that's a really good record as well. I don't know if you've had a chance to hear it.
I have not, but look, after Silverplanes, let me just say this label has my full attention.
Yeah. I mean, check it out. I mean, first of all, the thing that we're interested the most is real quality, besides being a very an artist-centric label. We partner with, we don't give, here's 12% of retail, but we partner completely 50-50 with the artist. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're about. We may not make the kind of money that a major label will make, but we really love doing it, and we feel that at some point we'll break even and then make money on it. But everyone will make money with us: the writers, the producers, and particularly the artist.
Yeah. You're thinking long term.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, you said that album Airbus has been sitting around since 2018 at least.
Yeah.
This is the last thing that Jeff worked on before he passed, I assume.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And it was totally complete at his time of passing? Was there any loose ends that needed to be tied up?
No, he was the last guy mixing.
Okay. So it sat for 5+, going on 6 years now. What were the discussions like about what to do with this record?
Well, first of all, so by the time we started to get serious about what we were going to do with it, there was a pandemic. And so we all laid low for 2 years. Basically, I wasn't going out to LA. Aaron wasn't coming here. Really 2 years of not doing anything. So now, we weren't sure what we were going to do with it. We knew we would get around to it, but there was nothing going on in the business. And so we felt we had a record of high quality, and its time would come. And then once we decided to go into business with Douglas Durst, like I said, it took probably 6 or 8 months for us to get that rolling. And now you're talking 3.5 years total from the time it was done to the time we could take seriously what we were going to do with it. And so here we are. Now we're releasing, and we you know we put a few things out to get some to see if people were still into it, and people were. They thought, wow, it's a really cool record.
Well, Jack, I'm a very impatient man, so I hope I'm not going to have to wait another 5 or 6 years to get the next Silverplane.
No, actually, the second album is about done.
Ooh, okay.
So yeah, but what we want to do is release this one, and then we'll release the next one in EP packages, I think.
Ooh. Yeah, because there's a few EPs. Now, I do want to go back in the Wayback Machine with you for a little bit with some of the legacy projects you worked on. But
Sure.
Staying with Silverplanes just for another minute or so.
Yeah, sure.
How did you shape this record? I mean, your production career is very well known. In the past 10 years or so, you've been very selective. I think you work with Clutch and a few other bands here and there.
Yeah.
But when it comes to Silverplanes, how did you craft these songs? What were the state that you found them in, and what was that overall contribution?
Well, for me, it was all about the songs themselves. So what I would do is I would ask Aaron to play me the song on guitar and on acoustic guitar, and he would play it. And when we would get that feeling right, like the chord progression, the tempo, the feel of the strum and everything were perfect, then I would record him singing with his acoustic guitar. And he has a pretty good internal metronome, so I would usually use a click track to get him started for the initial count off, and then turn it off and let him go. And then we would take that track and overdub to it. Sometimes we would keep that vocal and acoustic guitar, or sometimes we would just replace it. But that's how we went about it. And in this way, it wasn't like we always had a full band in the room, where we were building each of these songs from the ground up.
Mm-hmm. Is that kind of the key to production? Is the song needs to be able to stand on its own with just an acoustic guitar and the artist?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've worked in all kinds of ways. For example, with Aerosmith, it was never about the melody of the song or the lyric. We would build it up from the band up, and with Steven singing, just scatting over it, a semi melody and no lyrics. And so then it was about finding a lyric and a melody line that fit the band track we came up with, which is why, we got away with that for quite a few records and for many songs until when we got to Walk This Way, we couldn't come up with anything for it because it was just such a groove. It seemed impossible. What do you put to it? And so what comes from that is the famous Young Frankenstein story, which I'm sure you've heard.
Yeah, because at the core, we're listening to the songs, and going back to many of the songs on Toys in the Attic or Rocks. Those songs would be just as powerful as acoustic, just very much stripped back. It's the lyrics and some of the tongue in cheek, the eyebrows that kind of makes it that over the top Aerosmith.
We always knew that we could count on Steven for that, because that's the way he thinks. That's the way he operates, and that's who he is. that's it's always very witty, very bright. In that in between period, where I did Clutch, I also did a Supertramp album and a Slash album. So they were artists that I really always wanted to work with. I always wanted to work with Slash. And I certainly would never turn down working with Supertramp.
Mhm.
And I worked with a few others, but what I started to do in around 2000 was I started to do the thing that I was going to do in the beginning, which was film scores. And so I started doing film work around 2000, 2001. And, I started my career as composing for television while I was working at a record plant as a janitor. I was janitor by day and scoring a TV show at night. In the same studio, I was a janitor. So I've turned to that, and I'm still very busy with that.
Janitorial work? Are you saying that?
No, yeah. Well, here in the house, here at home.
So earlier in your career, I understand. Yeah, you started as a janitor, as a musician. And by the way, there's a great podcast that you were on with Bob Lefsetz. That there's some fantastic stories, and I'm going to refer people to that so we don't repeat.
Yeah. Right.
But one thing that was mentioned that you didn't go too deep in is your involvement with the Who and what went from the Lifehouse project to Who's Next. Now, when you kind of first entered that sphere of the Who, was the Lifehouse project still an active project?
There was no name for this project that we were doing, and so I mean, it was just tracks that Pete wanted to do with the band, and then to my surprise, it became Who's Next. Not the tracks that I did with him, but the tracks that were re-recorded note for note. Sometimes I think I hear what we did, but in there, but I probably not. But I think they released a package some time ago that may have some of that New York stuff on it. Okay. It was crazy couple of weeks that working on that project because Kit Lambert was some kind of character, man. That he was kind of out of his mind, and Keith was kind of out of his mind, and I loved everything about the whole project, and in particular Pete, who was just wonderful and kind of took me under his wing. One night, he brought me out to Forest Hills because he wanted me to do the live sound and just get the same sounds live that I was getting in the studio. And I didn't know my ass from my elbow about doing concert sound. And lucky for me, his own crew saved me because it was, I would have been lost. But they would take me out every night after we would finish like at midnight or 1. And then we would go out after that. I would be invited to go out with them, which was pretty wild.
I mean, throughout your career, you've dealt with some pretty, we'll say, eccentric people. And, you just mentioned Kit Lambert, Keith Moon, Phil Spector you work with. You were involved, you were around with John's Lost Weekend. How do you move in those universes of eccentric people?
Well, because I'm a wacko myself, so I feel like I'm in good, in company that I'm kind of wacky. I think for the most part, and for a good number of years, I was reliably sober. And so people could count on me to, in case of crisis, be able to handle it, whether it was a crisis in the studio or one outside of it. And so I was reliably, I was crazy, but I was reliable and a sober person. Not like I was an AA or anything, but I was never over the top.
You drove the getaway car.
I did drive the getaway car. Yes, I did. Yeah, you could count on, or to pull somebody out of a problem or out of a fight, or to just get in the middle of a band argument, or to just get the right arrangement for a song.
But at the heart of it, isn't production like just a series of problem solving?
It is. Yeah. And you have to be a politician as well, because sometimes you'll be dealing with a number of factions inside a band, like the drummer has got a completely different idea what the song is about than the guitar player. And so I don't know where I got those chops from. Maybe my dad was a union organizer, so maybe I got it there.
Okay. But yet it's this delicate balance of getting the best performance and coaxing people to be vulnerable and creative, but at the same time, just getting shit done.
Yeah. And the thing is to always respect, as far as I'm concerned, is to always respect the artist's idea first, because the reason you're there with him is because this person that you're, or group or whoever you're working with, has got the talent that brought them to this point that they're working with you. Mm-hmm. And so whenever it comes to what an idea or what's supposed to happen here, it's that I want to hear it from the band first, or from the artist first, or if I think there is some problem with it, I will say, let's try your idea first, and then you come in and listen to it. And if you think it's great, okay, good. If you think maybe you could try something else, I have an idea that might work, that fits right into what you're doing. And we'll try that. And the thing is, some artists are fine with that. I've worked with some that aren't. And quite honestly, the easiest artist that I ever worked with, and had that kind of relationship, was with John Lennon. Just absolutely easy to work with. You work with some great singers, and you might do 5 shots at that vocal, and then I'm going to comp it. Back then it was you comped it on tape. Now you comp it in Pro Tools. And a lot of times you'll have those artists leaning right over your shoulder, listening to every syllable that you're putting in. And with John, he was like, I'm going to go in the next room, you comp it, and when you think you've got the vocal, I'll come in and double it. That was it.
He's very good at delegating and just kind of respecting the lines between roles.
Yeah, he did. He said, I'm the artist, you're the producer, and let's work like that.
So let's jump into Double Fantasy for a bit. Now, you knew John prior. You'd worked with him on the Imagine record. This is kind of at the beginning of your career. I suppose you stayed in contact with him.
We'll be back after these messages.
Well, hey there, record collectors. There's a new service available that specializes in record cleaning, restoring, sticker removal, and professional grading.
VMGvinyl.com.
VMG Vinyl can help you make the most of your collectible records. From professional cleaning of records and sleeves,
removing old price tags and store stickers,
dry cleaning and rejuvenation of old shrink wrap to make it look like new, even providing you a professional play-tested third-party grade with either removable grading or encasing in plastic. You have a wide range of choices at VMGvinyl.com.
Buying a highly collectible record and you want it checked out by an expert?
VMG Vinyl can do that too. Head over there now and see what VMGvinyl.com can do for you and your collection. That's VMGvinyl.com, the one-stop shop for professional third-party grading, cleaning, and record restoration. That's VMGvinyl.com. Oh, and hey, record nerds, don't forget to clean your records with the very best and safest record cleaner, the Groove Washer. Make your records look and sound their very best and store them with confidence using the new Groove Washer Groove Guard record sleeves. You gotta try this out. It makes a huge difference to the quality of your vinyl experience. Ask for the Groove Washer by name at your local record store and accept no substitutes. Or head over to groovewasher.com and use discount code VINYLGUIDE10.
All hail the Groove Washer.
That's groovewasher.com, discount code VINYLGUIDE10.
Now we return to the program already in progress.
No limits.
So let's jump into Double Fantasy for a bit. Now, you knew John prior. You'd worked with him on the Imagine record. This is kind of the beginning of your career. I suppose you stayed in contact with him.
I worked on the Christmas record. And then he had me working with Yoko on all those records. Some of them he was producing. And frequently he would call me up and we would just go into the studio and jam. Maybe Mick Jagger would come by, maybe David Bowie, maybe Elton John.
Were you present for the Fame session with Bowie?
I was in and out of there, and that was in Record Plant. Yeah.
Okay. What are your recollections of that?
The only thing I remember distinctly is John saying, I'm writing you the best hit you will ever have. And it was his first number one record. And the fun, when we were doing Double Fantasy, so Bowie's office dropped off for John and Yoko 2 tickets to the opening of Elephant Man, which David Bowie was doing on Broadway. And John said, thank you, turned around and handed them right to me and said, enjoy.
So that night, David Bowie looked in the crowd where John would have been, and there you were with popcorn.
There was a party afterwards, and he was looking around for. Well, I had worked with him before, so I knew David.
Right. Did John or any of the Beatles, did they know about the Aerosmith version of Come Together?
Yeah, John did.
Mm-hmm.
He hated the movie.
Oh, who didn't?
Yeah, but we had a hit with it, and so that's how he knew it. He wrote it, and so it was. He was very aware of, and so who had a hit with it. Liked it, and of course I produced it, and George and Jeff mixed it.
All right, so you've known Jeff for years and years. Then you go way back with Jeff, yeah.
Yeah, I do. In fact, after that, George Martin invited me over to work at Air Studios because I had some Chrysalis dates coming up, and Chrysalis then owned Air Studios. And so he said, come over. And I had a whole bunch of English work, including Frankie Miller, a bunch of things I could produce while I was in England. So I could stay for 6-8 months if I wanted and work continuously at Air Studios. And he said, I'm going to hook you up. George, I'm going to hook you up. It'll be fine. You're going to love it. And so I arrived, and he had provided a beautiful flat in Kensington Gardens for me. And he said, and there's a car outside for you to use. And I went downside and I looked around. I didn't see anything but a Morgan. I don't know if you know what that is. That is a beautiful sports car. And I went back upstairs and I rung him up and I said, the only thing down there is a Morgan. He said, yeah, that's yours. So he treated me great. And we had, with Aerosmith, we had worked at Air Studios, so I got a feel for it, and I loved it. It was wonderful, and so I did a bunch of records there for a while, and just had a great time with George. And we were there for Christmas. My wife came over, and it was just there was an Air Christmas party, and Jeff Beck played at it, and it was just a wonderful thing to be there. Of course, England at Christmas time. Can't beat it.
So you've worked with all the Beatles. Have you worked with
Worked-
George on Concert for Bangladesh?
Right.
John, obviously. Ringo, I'm assuming there's some Ringo sessions in there.
Yeah, I did. I did I brought that "Grow Old with Me" to him. I'd asked. I call him Richard, by the way, not Ringo. He's Richard to me, but we'll call him Ringo for.
He still insists I call him Ringo. Sorry, it's
Okay. So I asked him one day if he had ever heard the tape that John had given me. He gave me a bunch of cassettes that had all of the material, some of it which is coming out now. And it was all stuff that I was to consider. It was stuff he had written over the years, and some of it he had written while he was in Bermuda. And like "Real Love" was on there.
okay.
But anyway,
Freeze a Bird and Now and Then, maybe.
Yeah. And each of these songs had a narration before it or after it. And John had told me that the plan was, although they were waiting for George to make up his mind that he was going to do it, but there was a plan that George and John and Paul would be a backup band for Ringo's album. And that was going to be in the works. And some of these songs that he sent me, he thought were going to be for Richard Starkey. And after the song and in the narration that followed the song, he would say, "Here's another one for Richard Starkey." And sometimes he would say, "This one is definitely for Ringo." So he would say all these things on it. And I said to Ringo, I said, "Have you ever heard this tape of John talking about these songs for you?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, I was in Los Angeles. I'll have the tape sent over and I'll make a CD of it. Here, I'll burn you a CD." And then I saw him about a week later, and I had burned the CD and I gave it to him. And then I saw him shortly after that again. And he said, "I was crying when I heard it. I couldn't believe how beautiful it was that he said that." And I said to him, "You know the song "Grow Old with Me"?" He said, "Yes, lovely song." And I said, "Why don't we do it? And I'll do all the strings. I'll do everything. I'll do it all for free." And so he got Joe Walsh. And Paul came into town and himself on drums. Cut the track. I did all the strings. We went into, this was done up at his studio. Then we went to United Studios and we cut the strings. I did the arrangement for a double string quartet and accordion, which is a nice mix when the accordion doubles the strings. Mm-hmm. And we did that track, and it's on maybe one or two albums back.
Wow.
"Grow Old with Me." It's Barbara's favorite song that he's ever done. But the thing I have to say, which he didn't notice when we were doing it, is that, and he's spoken about this in public, he said that Jack Douglas, all four of us are on that song. And here's how that goes. John wrote it. Paul's singing and playing bass on it. And in the string arrangement, I put "Here Comes the Sun." The string line is playing the melody of "Here Comes the Sun." And he finally heard it. It's just kind of hidden enough in there, so you don't hear it right away, but there it is. So he was thrilled that all four people are represented in that song.
Ah, that's beautiful. And the fact you still have those original tapes, those tapes that were the demos for Double Fantasy, yeah?
Yeah. It's two cassettes.
Now, going into Double Fantasy, the prime directive, I guess, of that, John wanted to make a statement. He's back. What other statements did he want to make besides that?
That he had survived all the years that and all of the trials and tribulations of the past, number of years, 5 years. Basically, what he wanted to say was, okay, I'm a middle-aged man now, and here I am, and I'm wondering how things are with you. Here's what's happening with me. This record represents where I am right now. And like everything that was John Lennon, he spoke the truth about where he was at whenever he wrote that song. That was about what he was feeling and who he was at the time. So this represented where he was in his relationship with his wife. And, when we started this record and we were having production meetings about what we were going to do, he said to me, I know you like to really rock hard, and you would like to think they're rock, but that's not what I'm looking to do here. I'm looking to do what he called an MOR record, which translates to middle of the road record, which was kind of frowned upon in the late 70s, early 80s. Right. But he wanted that record, and he wanted it to appeal to people of his age. And he felt that he wasn't making a record for people between the ages of 12 and 20. And he was making a record for the people between the ages of 28 and 40 and older. And so we were much more reserved, and which is the reason why when I brought in the guys from Cheap Trick to do I'm Losing You, he loved it, and that was a blast cutting it. But frankly, it didn't fit on the record because it was so much more edgy than anything we were doing. So I re-recorded it with the band I had put together to work with him.
Was the original vision like because you had to take John's songs and then find the band to play them, and of course rehearse them in secret and everything. But yeah, was the original thought, because you've been working with Cheap Trick, maybe we have Rick and Boone come in and they could be the band. That was the band before the Tony Levin, Earl Slick version.
Yeah, at one point I thought that Cheap Trick would be the perfect backup band for John. They had a great work ethic, and they loved him, and they loved the Beatles, and they were extremely Beatle influenced, and it would have been a great match. And he loved Rick as well, and Bunny. But as much as I thought about that in the beginning, I knew that I would have to put together a band of his contemporaries, and that's what he wanted. And I knew, Hugh McCracken and Andy Newmark and Tony Levin and that crew would be the only wild card was Earl Slick, who I never invited to rehearsal. I brought him in as a wild card, and the reason for that was something I remember about I was talking to Matthew Fisher from Procol Harum one time, and I said, how come Robin Trower, when I hear his solos on your records, they're so much cooler than on his records? I mean, that was my opinion, and it was his too. And he said the reason for that was that he never came to rehearsal. And so, a lot of our stuff was relatively complicated, and he would have to do these solos kind of like on the fly. He would have to catch up to whatever it was. And so he would come in with no preconceived ideas about what a solo was going to be on these Procol Harum songs. He'd just go for it. And that was the excitement. So I thought, that's what I'm going to do with Earl, who, I always loved what he did with Bowie, great stuff. And I thought he'll be the wild card. So it was funny, and he was thrilled to do it. And Earl's a great guy and easy to work with and fun. When I got in there, I had it set up so that John was in a booth playing and singing so he could drive the rhythm section. And I had Earl sitting next to Hugh McCracken, who had already worked with Paul and had worked with John as well. I had charted all of the songs. And I went out and I put the sheet music on for the particular song we were doing. I put the sheet music on the music stands, and there's one on Huey's and one on Earl's. And so Huey said to Earl, "What's that over there?" And Earl turned around, and Huey turned his sheet music upside down. And Earl does not read music. So now we count off the song, and they're starting to play, and Earl's like, he's just kind of trying to catch up. And he's making believe that he's reading the music. And and so we stop. And, John's like, "What's going on out there?" And so Huey says, "No, just a little problem here." And he turns over Earl's music. And of course, there's hilarity and everyone's laughing. And now Earl's comfortable with the scene, and everyone else is too. But I told him, just go for it. When you hear something, just go for it. Don't worry about playing the chords. When you hear a lick that you can throw it in. When you don't. And it worked out really great.
There's that one part at the end of Watching the Wheels, which it sticks in my head. It almost, the song at the very end kind of almost drips into this spaghetti Western kind of motif. Uh-huh. Do you have a story around that change?
What I did on the end of it was I dried it up, and I think the last thing you hear is Tony Levin's part. And maybe the marimbas, a little bit of marimbas, and then it goes into a bit of a dreamscape.
Yeah.
And you see those dreamscapes that are in the record are things that John just allowed me to do. He might leave and say, "Do a dreamscape here," and then I would do it, and you come back in the next day and go, "Oh, I love it. It's great." It's the only thing that happened on that one, because you hear the sea coming in and the ocean, you hear kids laughing, and faintly off in the distance there's a dog barking, and you really have to tune in for that. And Yoko turned to me and she said, "Dogs are bad luck."
What do you do with that? Okay.
But the other one is the beginning of "I'm Your Angel." Mm-hmm. On this one, John said, why don't we ride in a carriage in Central Park to the Palm Court at the Plaza, and we'll have the song started in the Palm Court. So we take you on that trip, and he wanted, as you're walking into the plaza, he wanted there to be a beggar man on the street, and that's him, and he's going, and what he says in there is, but I don't know if it's even audible. He says, "You got a lucky face," which is something he always used to say to me from day one. From the first day we met, he said that to me, and he never stopped saying that I had a lucky face. It's probably an old Liverpool saying for, who knows, but he used to say that. The other thing he used to say to me, well, he didn't used to say, he only said it to me once, and that was at some point during the album, about halfway through, I said to me, "Not for nothing, John, but you could have had anyone in the world produce this record, anybody. It's your comeback record. So why me?" What a terribly insecure question to ask, but I had to ask it. And he put his fingers up over his head like this. And he said, "Good antenna. That's all you need. And you got it." So what I had learned working with him previously over the years and watching him work was that he was very impatient, and that if you got stuck somewhere, he could lose it quite easily, or it would just start to build up. And I always stayed 1 or 2 steps ahead of him, which was something that was taught to me by Roy Cicala, who was my mentor at Record Plant and an incredible engineer. And he said to me, always stay 1 or 2. This is when I was assisting him. He said, stay 1 or 2 beats ahead of me and 3 or 4 ahead of the client. And he taught me to do that. And that's something that works really well. And I think I brought that to everything that I did, was trying to stay ahead of it. But I particularly used that with John and Yoko. I learned to use it with Yoko when I was working on those few albums, which made her very comfortable because I could anticipate what she wanted to do next.
And that's, I guess, if I could understand that right, it really is being aware, reading the room, and almost understanding what the person is thinking so you can have a response ready.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
That's why the good antenna.
Now, with Yoko's contributions to Double Fantasy, I mean, the album, a lot of my favorite parts of the album are Yoko's songs, and understanding Yoko's material, especially in the early 70s, it didn't always lend itself to contemporary listening. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, but not meant to be.
Yeah.
It certainly was never a commercial success.
But
it was art.
It
was just art.
But going into Double Fantasy, they knew they were going to do this pairing. Was there a discussion about having her material perhaps be a little bit more, or be a little less challenging?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was very important. And Yoko really trusted me to direct her in that way, so that it would be more commercially viable or fit more with the record, still allowing her the artistic expression that she has, but for it to fit in the context of the whole album. So yeah, it was very often, in fact, most of the time, I would work with Yoko alone, and the day would start with a breakfast meeting. I mean, we lived in the same neighborhood, so it was a 2-3 block walk for me to go have breakfast with them, and then plan out the day, and then that would be like at 9 a.m, and then John would go back to the Dakota. So would Yoko. I would go to the studio, and then Yoko would be in by noon, and we would work 5 or 6 hours, and then John would come in. And then Yoko was more comfortable because if John heard a flat note or something with the time that was off, he would be critical of her. And I would be much more patient, and maybe in the next take she would get it right, and I wouldn't have to, scold her about being sharp or flat. That would just make her more insecure than she already was about trying to make this record or these songs fit, and that worked very well.
Now, I understand Double Fantasy, as you were preparing it and as you were recording it, it was very much a secret.
Yeah.
And during the recording, especially during the early parts, would you have to almost sneak John in or Yoko in? What kind of, I guess, subterfuge was required to keep that secret?
Well, the reason we didn't work at Record Plant was because that was a well-known studio, and people regularly lined up, kids lined up outside the doors on 44th Street to see who was coming in and out and get an autograph, because the stars went in and out of that building. But Hit Factory, this was the first incarnation of Hit Factory, was way off the beat. It was between 9th and 10th Avenue. It was like nobody was hanging around down there. That was a very iffy part of town, that far west. And so you could go in and out of that building, and, maybe the occasional wino would see you, but there wasn't anybody. There were no tourists. There was nothing going on there. So I knew I could get them in and out of that building without being seen, and it worked until they announced they were doing it, and we were found out, and then there would be some people, but not as many people as would be outside Dakota when they found out we were making a record.
Right.
And it wasn't until after, I think, the vocal on Watching the Wheels that John told Yoko to go ahead and announce we were doing it.
And how did that announcement happen? Like, did the recording process change in any way or afterward?
Not at all. No, John said, "Mother, tell the world we're making a record." He shouted out.
And the only difference was then there were more people waiting at the door when you walked in the morning.
Yeah, well, there were more people waiting outside the Dakota.
Okay.
They announced, somehow they found out where we were eventually, but that took a while.
Mm-hmm.
That took a while.
Now, the nature of our podcast is records and record collecting and a lot of kind of physical form media. You had, I guess, the very unique experience of being with John in the Dakota around his record collection. What do you recall about John's music collection?
It was vast, and it was so big that they had another room. They had another whole apartment for his gear and his records. But what was most important was, I think, his love of what was new. He thought that rap was going to be a giant thing. He was into Jamaican, what do you call it? It's almost rap. The very early
reggaeton or whatever?
Oh no, anyway, I can't remember, but it was a kind of reggae that was almost rap, and he was totally into that. And he was into reggae, and he was into what we called the new wave music then, which he thought Yoko was catching up to Yoko.
Well, and that's really interesting you say that, because I always think when I hear Yoko's tracks on Double Fantasy, it seems to be like, okay, that is actually very much to the time. I could see that at a place like Max's Kansas City or CBGB's in the late 70s. Do you know if John had any punk records?
I don't know if he had any punk records. He certainly was aware of everything. We didn't talk about it, I don't think. We did talk about the Dolls at one point, because he knew I had worked with them, and he wanted to know what that experience was like. He thought they were cool.
I want to know what that experience was like. How was that? Like, what was it like recording? That was the debut album of New York Dolls, their first time in the studio, if I remember right.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I knew them because I lived downtown, and I knew the scene there. I knew Patty and Lou and the Dolls, and that's why I was probably put on as the engineer. But Todd didn't like them at all. That wasn't a good relationship. I remember we were doing, I think, either Personality Crisis or Trash, and David was in the vocal booth. And he was singing live, and the band is banging away. And Todd's going, "God, this is awful." And I'm saying, "Well, I said it's unique. There's something about when they play together. It's kind of a special kind of noise that's refreshing." And David came in. The band came into the control room, And, David is very sharp and he's smart. And, and Todd, not knowing what else to say, said, well, that's going to be beautiful. We're going to put harmony on that and it'll be great. And David said to him, harmony? Are you accusing me of having melody? And that was like taken seriously. And Todd didn't show up quite a bit. We had to run interference for Mercury Records so they wouldn't know that the patients were running the asylum. But we got that record done, and Todd came in and we mixed it in a few days. I was digging it, and David Krebs was managing Lieber Krebs. They were managing the Dolls. That was their big act. Mm-hmm. And David said, "Look, I know you pulled this thing together to make it happen. Of course, we're going to give you a large credit on the album as engineer." He said, "But as a prize for you for doing it, we want you to look at our baby band that we manage, which was Aerosmith." And that was my prize for doing that. And Bob Ezrin, after doing that Dolls album, who used to stop by all the time, because I'd worked with Bob on Alice Cooper records, and Bob said, "You're a producer. You should consider giving up this recording, record engineer gig and become a producer. You could come work with me on my company." And that led to Alice Cooper, which I did, I think, just before. But
wow,
that's how I get my strictly engineering gig. But
that's how you got your wings.
Yeah, that's how I got my wings. And the thing was, it really put a stop to my wanting to work on film for a year because I got so busy as a producer.
So when Aerosmith goes to record Come Together, do you guys have a conversation with John? Is there any dialogue? What's the he must have been familiar with Aerosmith at the time and having their records. Yeah.
Oh yeah. We met up in a coffee shop quite accidentally a year or two before Double Fantasy. And he said to me, "Wow, you're really on top of the world, aren't you?" And he was aware of everything I was doing. And he read Billboard and, he was on top. He knew what was going on. He invited me over to his house. He gave me his private number, and I didn't bother him because, I had read he was a house husband and he was baking bread, and I didn't want to. But really, what he wanted to know about was the state of the technology now, because he knew I was so busy. At that point, I was making digital records on on tape, not on ADATs. I couldn't stand that, but I was already, I already had my toe in the water on the Mitsubishis and the Sony machines, which were, at very low sampling rates, but it was interesting. And he wanted to know about that stuff. Of course, when it came to, and I really still preferred analog tape, and I still do sometimes, but when we recorded Double Fantasy, we did two machines. We recorded the basic tracks on a Studer 16 track, which is a big fat sound at 15 IPS. Mm-hmm. Then put another machine in the room, a 24 track running at 30 IPS, put two tracks of work, a mix of the basics on that, put the 16 track tape away, and then did all our overdubs on the 24 track. And then when it came time to mix, we went back to the 16 track, which is big and fat and fresh. And we ran the two machines together, and that makes a really glorious sound.
That's great. So you didn't incur the generational loss from doing the overdubs and working with the tape day in, day out. You had a fresh generation ready.
That tape was only run across the heads a few times until we mixed.
Now, with Aerosmith, I don't think Double Fantasy did this. Maybe you did, but with Aerosmith, there were stereo and quad mixes. Can you walk us through a little bit about how you would approach them, the quads?
Cool. At Studio A at Record Plant had a quad set up, and we were always confused because there were any number. It's just like the Dolby Atmos and the Sony systems now, two totally different codes for those things. So then at that time we had there were a number. It was like Betamax and VHS. There were two different kinds of systems, so we would just record on a 4-track. We would mix onto a 4-track and let whoever was going to do the conversions to their system of quad take care of the rest. It was really the most fun was because it was a quad control room. The most fun was just mixing it in quad. We never took it seriously because we thought it was just a thing that was going to fly by. What we found more challenging was mixing for AM radio, which at the time was mono. So you could do your album mix for FM radio, that was fine. But if you didn't do a tight, almost mono mix for radio, the outer edges of the mix went down 3 dB, and the center, whatever's in the center, came up 3 dB. So you had very loud vocals and drums and very little guitars. So that was always a challenge. And the other challenge during this whole period was putting those records, that music onto a disc. That became a science and an art and a science, because the outside of the disc is got more bottom and louder than the inside of the disc, which is turning faster and has a smaller circumference. So you had to really think about how you laid a record out. And the thing was, in my head, when I was recording the songs, I always wanted the album to kind of have a story to tell in some way, so that when you were listening to it, you were taken from one song to the next, and you felt like you belonged in this next song because of what preceded it. But at the same time, you couldn't have this big bass heavy thing in the end of a side. So it was really really scientific. So you could start with a thing like Back in the Saddle, which is dead heavy, and end with I don't know if that was You See Me Crying, B-side ending.
That certainly must have played a role in Double Fantasy, because the way it's sequenced, you got John, Yoko, alternating tracks.
Yeah, and a story to tell.
Yeah,
starting over, which tells you very, very much like rock starts with "Back in the I'm back." So starting over is it tells you what's going on. Right. I don't know if you've ever heard the stripped down version of. Have you ever heard that?
I think I did once. It came out just a handful of years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it has a very different beginning. It doesn't start with the bells. It starts with a dedication to Buddy Holly, the Everly Brothers, Elvis.
Okay.
Which is John, and has a lot of John talking throughout very much like his cassette that he gave me, which was always narrated. He liked to narrate things.
Now, the night of John's murder, he was at the Hit Factory working on a mix of Walking on Thin Ice?
We were working at Record Plant.
Oh, Record Plant. Okay. Working on Walking on Thin Ice.
Yeah.
Was that song completed that night, the mix and everything?
Yeah, done. We were ready to master the next day.
Okay. So the record that was available in January, that is the last thing that he worked on, and it was complete. No other. Well, all right, people. We're going to end it right there for now. again, this is just part 1. Part 2 is coming out shortly. And in that, we pick right back up. We talk about John and his last day, what he did on that last day in the studio, how he wanted to redo Strawberry Fields Forever. We talk about revisiting the master tapes for the Double Fantasy 2010 stripped back version and lots more. So make sure you follow the Vinyl Guide podcast in your podcast app so you get alerted immediately when part 2 is available. And for those of you who are Patreon supporters, well, you know you already have access to part 2. You can go enjoy that right now. Patreon.com/Vinyl Guide, and you can get right into it. Otherwise, we'll circle back shortly with part 2. Thanks again for listening. Cheers.